Yes.
All right. So today, this is really an update, and I apologize. I forgot you were in that session in Hull. In 2010, I did a workshop. It was called "On the Road to Restoring the Motor City." So this one is going to be progress on the road. We talk about where things were, where they are now, some of the advantage of the progress that has been made, and also some of the challenges that we've addressed, and hope it'll be helpful as you're doing the different work in the areas where you are that will encourage you. I thought I'd start because a lot of people know a lot about Detroit, but I thought I might share some things you might not be aware of. Detroit was the first city to assign individual telephone numbers, 1879. You like snack food? Henry Ford allowed workers on his assembly line to take short breaks, which led to the trend of workers purchasing small bags of food that could be consumed quickly. The first traffic light was manually operated by a staff of police, 1915, the corner of Woodward and Jefferson in the city of Detroit. The first freeway in the country was in Detroit. It's a little strip of about 2.5 miles. It's called the Davidson Freeway. I actually grew up, the first home I lived in was about 2 blocks from there. I had to cross it in order to get to elementary school, Davidson Elementary School. You like coffee in the morning?
Yeah.
If you enjoy morning coffee brewed in an automatic coffee maker, then you need to thank the coffee clock, which was invented by George Schuler from Detroit. And if you drink milk out of a paper carton, it was created by Pure Pak in 1930 in Detroit. And the thing you might not be aware of coming soon, Detroit, the nation's first urban restorative city. That's my personal objective. You can say when it happens, you can say he told me it was going to happen.
So what do you mean by soon?
Soon. A little bit about me. Lifelong resident of Detroit. Formerly worked for Coleman A. Young, who was the first African-American mayor of the city of Detroit. Was on his senior staff for the last 7 years of his administration. Was Southeast Michigan Area Director and Director of the TOP program for Prison Fellowship Ministries from 95 to 2000. Served as Director of Youth Development for New Detroit, where it focused on best practices in K-12 education from 2000 to 2009. I pastor a church in Detroit also, about 125 members. My oldest member is 102, and I have 2 families that just gave birth to babies in the last 2 months. Became a restorative practices consultant, and Steve Core is partly responsible for that. Sat in a circle and told him about some challenges I was having on my job, and he came into that fishbowl and said, "Quit!" So I went back.
Sometimes you gotta put,
Became program officer with the Skillman Foundation in 2010, and I'm honored to just attended my first board meeting as an IIRP trustee. So, do I have a clicker? No, I don't know if there's one here or not.
Do you want me to go and get you one?
No, this is fine. So I want to, a little bit of a refresher. In 2010, what was going on and what was happening, what we were trying to do. Conditions: 1, there was major instability in our school system and our municipal government. Between the year 2000 and between 2000 and 2013, we have had 9 different people leading our school system. And actually, we had 2 that were seated at the same time. We had an emergency manager and a superintendent operating at the same time. They were both giving directions to school leaders. One was saying, "You need to take this test." The other was saying, "Shh, don't do that." So you can imagine how things worked out for the kids. Municipal government was also in turmoil. Our city was near financial problems at that time. In fact, 2010, so Mayor Kilpatrick had resigned from office in disgrace, was under, he had violated the federal law and was on trial. We had, between 2010 and now, I think we've had 4 different mayors. Kilpatrick, yeah, we've had 4 different folks that have been leading the city. Right now we have a mayor and an emergency financial manager because of the financial situation in the city. The city has been in continual decline. Detroit at one time was close to over 2 million people. We'll be happy probably to be around 650,000 the next census. And that all happened over the span of about 40, 50 years. Say a little bit about that. That was partly by design. I mentioned that the Davison Freeway was the first freeway in the country. Detroit was the guinea pig for freeways in our nation. If you look at a map of any major city in Detroit, in the country, and you look at the map of the highway system in Detroit, everywhere else the highway goes around the core city. In Detroit, it spokes through the city. So we have one freeway. It's called the I-96, and it is 14 lanes across. 14. It's 7 going in each direction across. It has local lanes and express lanes. Well, and it runs from near downtown to beyond the city limits. So there were people living in all of that space, businesses in that space. It's gone. In the late 50s, early 60s, thank you. Okay. In the early 60s, we found out that Russia had the bomb, right? And during World War II, we were the arsenal of democracy. Well, my minor was military science in college, and I saw some Russian target maps, and it just so happened that one of their targets was the intersection of I-75 and I-94. That's because within a 10-mile radius of that was the world headquarters of GM, Ford, and Chrysler, and there were these manufacturing plants that employ thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people in total. And so the Fed said, hey, we need to decentralize our manufacturing. So the plants moved to the cornfields, and guess what? For some reason, the people went with them. There was a thriving community, African-American community, with hotels, businesses, and all of that stuff going on. And when they were trying to find a place to put in I-75, guess where they put it? Right through the middle of that neighborhood. So Detroit's demise has been a long time in the making. Banks were redlining for many years, so you couldn't get funds to fix up homes in Detroit, but you could take your money and go to the suburbs. Oh, by the way, one other first. Have anybody ever been to a shopping mall? The very first shopping mall was just outside the city of Detroit, so right on the edge of the city limits, Northland Mall. So we had a lot, there was significant decline in 2010 in federal, state, corporate dollars, and philanthropic dollars for a host of reasons. One, the economy tanked, and in 2008 is really when the national crash occurred. But GM, Ford, and Chrysler had been ill for a while, and the joke was if GM or Ford sneezed, Detroit caught pneumonia. So we had been sick long before the crash came, and when it did come, Detroit had some of the highest foreclosure rates of any place in the nation. In fact, Michigan had the most outgrowth. People were leaving the city at a faster rate than any other place. So economically, we had been challenged for a long time, and it just got worse. So, oh yeah.
right arrow.
So we talk about infusing restorative practices, and that's my aim, to see restorative practice infused in every major institution, particularly that touches kids, but the adults as well. So schools, social work, the criminal justice system, social service agencies, families, and working with churches. It was challenging to do that in this environment. But there was progress that was going on. So we'll look at some of the efforts that were underway in 2010. Number one, the Detroit Public Schools, the leadership kept changing. Every time someone would get in place, we give them the presentation. In fact, at one point, Ted came in. I had all the senior staff from the school district, their police department, their counselors, and I actually had them fill out surveys. We did the overview, and they said that restorative practice would be far better than what we were currently doing. It doesn't get much better than that, right? Well, the superintendent was behind it, and shortly after that meeting, she was fired. We got an emergency manager in and had to start all over again. But there were two schools where we were able to do some training, Cody and Osborne high schools. You may recall that America's Promise identified what they call dropout factories across the country. Schools that were like 60% or more of their kids were not graduating. It was just terrible. Well, we had at least two of them. Cody and Osborne were one. So those schools were converted into multiple small schools. There are 3 small schools in each of those buildings. And we were able to do training in those schools. One of the other challenges that we had is because of the economics within the school system, DPS, which had a majority of the kids at that time, there were a lot of layoffs. And we placed staff based on seniority. So you do the training, but the next cycle, a lot of those folks would get bumped. In fact, I trained 60 or 70 staff in Osborne, and today, I did that training in 2009, it's either 8 or 9, and today there are only 2 of the teachers left. Now, the 2 that are left were 2 of the best, but again, when you're talking about, this is one of the not really an aha, it's just a reality. It's hard to sustain a work when the leadership is being bounced around, and that was happening a lot, and the staff is being bounced around. The advantage is that those that get it, they're infecting or pollinating other places. So that's somewhat of an upside. But the idea of creating a core environment, of changing the conditions, it's difficult to do that. You have to keep trying, but this is just a reality of what has happened in the city. One of the other things that's happening, the Skillman Foundation, one of the reasons I started working with this, well, when I was working for New Detroit, the Skillman Foundation basically funded all the work that I was doing in best practices in K-12 education. The foundation it's a children's foundation. We operate strictly in Detroit. They identified the 6 neighborhoods that have the highest concentration of school-age children. About a third of the school-age children living in the city lived in these 6 neighborhoods. And what they found was that the youth serving agencies were not located in those 6 neighborhoods. None of the best schools were located in those 6 neighborhoods. And so, and there was no organized resident group that was looking out for the interests of children in those neighborhoods. So about 7 years ago, when they started this program, they just began having meetings with the community. They'd bring folks in, they'd show them data about the kids, and invited them to come together and figure out what they wanted for their kids. And if they would do that, we would put dollars behind it to support it. Well, today we now have governance groups in each of those 6 neighborhoods. They are elected. In fact, they'll have a judge come in, they'll run for election, just like city council, and get sworn in, and they've taken seriously the mission of changing the conditions for their kids. And as a result of the platform that we've built, new resources are now coming in, federal dollars, philanthropy, which avoided Detroit like the plague, because the first question was, where do you go? You know, the mayor was changing every other year. School system, there was no on-ramp into the process, so people weren't coming in. Now they're starting to come back. The other thing the foundation did, I knew that in order for restorative practices to flourish and to really become rooted in the city, there needed to be an organization that owned it. And Black Family Development is a social service agency in Detroit that works with juvenile justice kids, but they do a whole battery of services within the community. Alice Thompson is the president, the CEO of that organization. She's just phenomenal. And we made it possible for them to become an affiliate of the IIRP. Her entire staff of 100 people have been trained in restorative practices, and she actually infused restorative practices into the internal operations of her organization. So to the point that her caseworkers, they use restorative question cards as part of their case management system. And now if a staff person, if a manager has a problem with a staff person and it rises to Ms. Thompson's desk, the first thing she asks them is, where are the answers to the question? And if that hasn't been done, then the manager hasn't done their job, right? So she has taken to it. She's owned it. She also, the city has also applied for an Promised Neighborhoods, a federal program. She led the process to get some of our neighborhoods identified as Promised Neighborhood areas, and they wrote restorative practices into that, where they're working with would be working with schools and the communities to improve the neighborhoods for children. She also does work with block clubs, and in several of our neighborhoods, they've gone out and actually helped to create new block clubs, and they infuse restorative practices as part of the training for the families and the residents that are working in those areas, living in those areas. The other thing we did, Plymouth Educational Center is a charter school system. It's a pre-K through 12. Dr. Chris Plum, who at the time was the superintendent, took the restorative practice like a duck to water, and his entire team were trained in restorative practices and began training. They began implementing. They did the whole school change process. And I'll just share a couple of stories that came out of that school. Number one, on an academic side at the high school, they had a teacher who was teaching in an advanced European literature class. And what she did was, she said, you know, it's a pretty difficult course. But she said after going through the training, she began teaching in a restorative way. And she said, I began seeing the students became more engaged and their academic performance went up. Things got much better. So those things were taking place. So what's happening now? Number one, Plymouth Educational Center, again, they are doing extremely well. They do their morning meetings, and if you get a chance to see them, the students are very engaged in the process. One other story, in the high school, assistant principal was in his office one day, and a group of students came walking by his door. One of them stuck his head in the door and said, listen, we just wanted to let you know we're on our way to the cafeteria. We got to deal with this. We're going to do a circle. And he kept on stepping. So the assistant principal said he started to stop them. It's about 20 kids. And he said, well, you know, we've been, you know, marinating them in this process. Let's see what happens. So about 15, 20 minutes later, same group of 20 kids come walking past. A different kid sticks his head in the door. We just wanted to let you know we're on our way back to class. We got it taken care of. Everything's cool. And so I asked him, I said, so what was the issue? He said, I don't have a clue. He found out later it was some typical high school, he said, she said stuff. But here, you had kids who took it upon themselves to say, look, this is serious enough. We need to deal with this, and we can fix this. And they did. And they didn't need the adults, the assistant principal, to help them with it. So that's just one example of what's happening there. Something else that's happened, Cody and Osborne, there are still teachers actually in each of the schools that are doing the process. They had whole school, but it was just really, really challenging getting the leadership. And now, I don't know if I told you, the principals are gone. Kavari is gone.
Oh.
They got rid of her.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Patillo is gone. Patillo is gone.
Just tell me who's left.
Yeah, Jonathan is still there, and Michelle Parker is still there. They also got rid of, I think Felicia is gone too, Felicia Cook. So, again, we've got the change. The leadership have said that they really want to do restorative practices, and I think if the funding were there, we could do it. But it is very important that leadership buys in and that they are there for the training. I had the privilege Saturday of going to Newark and doing a training there at Barringer High School. It's my understanding it's been I guess a failing school because it's been reconstituted. Had about, I think, 30 or so staff there, and 2 of the assistant principals sat through the whole session, and the staff were just firing questions. And at one point, one of them said, listen, we need to stop, just to let you know, this isn't about being defiant or being opposed to this. We just want to make sure we understand it so we can implement it with fidelity. So being able to take a staff and to encourage them in that process is really important, and the leadership is what's so important. Leadership counts. EAA. So the state of Michigan, it's not just Detroit. Detroit gets all the press, but a lot of schools across the state are not doing well. So the state created the Educational Achievement Authority. It's comparable to the recovery district that's in New Orleans. After Katrina came in and basically wiped out everything, they created a statewide system to start the schools over. A lot of people have said that Detroit had its own Katrina. It just took 60 years for it to. And so Dr. Covington, who is the chancellor of the EAA, when he first came on board, our foundation made it possible for he and his senior management to go to Chicago, New Orleans, and Denver to see what they were doing, because they each had something similar to what he was trying to create. His philosophy was, we're creating a different system for a different outcome. Well, he and I, we got to spend quite a bit of time together, and I just kind of mentioned restorative practices to him. And he was so impressed with it that he wrote it into the strategic plan for this system. So their disciplinary strategy was to be restorative. So last year, when they first opened up, about 2 weeks before school started, we did 11, there were 15 schools, 12 of them we did training for, the other 3 are charter schools. And it just so happened on the day that we were doing the training, they were expecting $24 million in Title I dollars. So they were going to do whole school in each of the schools. They had, that day they were notified, oh, you're not going to get 24 million. You're going to get 6. So they had to, that's why some of the principals ended up having to go out, because they had to redo their budgets. And one of the things that ended up getting cut was the rest of the whole school plan. However, there were some of the schools that, even with that one training, the intro training, totally revolutionized what was happening in their buildings. Now, all of these schools were functioning in the lowest 5% of schools in the state. That's why they were taken over, right? Brenda Scott, which is also located in one of our Skillman neighborhoods, in the Osborne neighborhood, was a middle school that had just been chronically failing kids. The year before, I think the principal, just in one fell swoop, went in and suspended the whole class. just let them all go. the new principal, his name is Dr. Mark, just got his PhD approved, Dr. Marquis Stewart. I went, he said, before school started, the first day we met him, he said, I'm sorry I'm late for the meeting. He said, but they had staff training and everything. He said, my plan is, he's an old Southern guy, right? Southern girl. My plan is I'm going to take my staff. We got to get out in the community. We got to see where these kids live and you know, because we're going to help all these kids. I said, well, we can help you with that. We took them around because we had community organizations and everything. You know, took them around, got a bus. And then he said, you know, people been telling me that, you know, you got some bad kids. You have to watch out for them bad kids. So the first day of school, I went and second day of school, he said, you know, I'm expecting about 700 kids. And he said, I've got just about 700 in the building. He said, but all them bad ones haven't shown up yet. He said, I got a few that need a little encouragement, but we'll love them. They'll be all right. We'll take care of them. We love them, man. They'll be fine. And I watched his staff. The first day, they brought, when I got there, the 8th graders were coming in. They put them in the gym, put them in the stands, and they brought the staff out in the middle of the floor and began introducing the staff. And each of the staff would speak to the students. And one teacher, I can't remember what she was, I can't remember, it was language arts. She walked up to them and looked at them and said, look, I really don't care what happened to you last year. She said, but what I know is this, you all are brilliant. And she mentioned the name of the highest performing school in the state. And she said, if you will work with me, I guarantee you, when you leave my room, you will be prepared to go to that school. If you go into that school today, and we took our Skillman board, we actually had a board meeting there. We went into the building, we went into the classrooms. Kids were so engaged in the work that they didn't even realize we were there, really. And when you talk, if I were to call Dr. Stewart right now, he would tell you that restorative practice is a major part of the reason that environment has been created. They use it, they're serious about it, they're engaging parents, they're engaging kids in a different way, and it's the same kids. So it's another key that leadership matters. There's another school, the YMCA Leadership Academy. It's a charter school. They are partnering with Black Family Development and doing wraparound services for the kids and doing it all in a restorative way. So we're really anxious to see how that's working out. Juvenile justice and criminal justice system. So what's going on? The Detroit Police Department, we've had we've had 4 police chiefs in the last 5 years. Yeah, I think 5 years. However, there's an anti-youth violence initiative that's going on, and they wrote restorative practices into that. One of the individuals who's been trained and Monica Evans, she's a police officer, and she works with kids in both Cody and Osborne, and she does a phenomenal job. She's now going to be training the police department has created community liaison officers. All of them are going to be trained in restorative practice. Monica is training them, and then they'll be working in our neighborhoods, working in a restorative way with clients. One of the former chiefs pulled me in his office and said, look, I've only got a couple of thousand police officers. He said, I have to suspend some of them. And he says, I don't like what I get back, so I need to know how to be more restorative with them, and I want them to be restorative on the street. So he said, listen, I want you to do an orientation for my command staff. So I guess it was a year and a half ago now, time flies. We went to Lansing with his command staff. We did an orientation. One of the officers there was Inspector Rivers. She was over the internal discipline for the department. And she just loved it, right? So I didn't hear from her for a while, but she went back and implemented a restorative model just based on that little time that we were together. And she told me one story. She got a call from a commander. He said, listen, all I need you to do is to make sure that I cross every T and dot every I, because this lieutenant has got to go. That's all I need from you, right? He's a screw up, and I want him out. So she reviewed the case and said, well, let's try something a little different. Said, okay, but... So she calls the guy in, and he's fully expecting to be fired, right? He said, so I know you're here to fire me. He said, no, I'm not here to fire you, but I do want to talk to you. And she created a circle, used the questions and everything. Totally, it was so much stuff going on in this guy's world that it was impacting his work. But because they took the time to go through this process, he's probably now one of the best lieutenants in the department. And I asked her, I said, you know, if you had just fired him, which you clearly could have done based on the stuff he was doing, you know, how much you guys have invested in this guy? She said probably $100,000 or more. So they began using it. She's now retired. We've got a new police commander, chief in, some of her support staff, the officers that were in the department with her, you know, when they first saw this stuff, they was like, yeah, I don't know. But after they sat through a couple of them, they were just blown away by the response to the officers. And what do you do when you're in a disciplinary hearing, and at the end of it, the person being disciplined says, okay, so when are we going to do this again? When does that happen, right? And they said, we need to do this more often. So the goal, the new chief is in, he's put in new folks, and Monica is waiting on a date to do the training for the new command staff, and ultimately the goal is to train all of the officers. I told Chief Godby when he called me, and I said, look, how much time do you guys spend processing somebody when you take them off the street? He said, probably about 2 hours. I said, you know, what would happen if you took that same time? I mean, you can make judicious decisions now. They do that every day. What happens if you did a circle with the folks involved right there on the street? Said it would do a couple of things. Number one, you won't have all that paperwork. Number two, part of the problem, I tell people, we don't have a crime problem. We never have. We have a relationship problem. You know, it's just like the flu. You get the flu, you grab your Snuggie, your blanket. If that's all you do, you're going to be sick for a while. That chill is just a symptom that there's a deeper issue that needs to be addressed. And as you address that issue, the symptoms go away. The same thing is true. So I'm not telling anybody, don't go fire all your police, don't go shutting down all your jails. We need them. But that can't be all that we need. And for your officers, all they are is the authority figure, the guy with the Glock. But what happens if they do a restorative circle right there in the neighborhood? It changes the citizens' perspective of who they are. They will also change the officers will be able to change their perspective of the citizens, and you're less likely to have that same problem again.
See, the problem, Henry, for police, having spent 30 years, was you did nothing or something. The something was to
Arrest.
force the law.
Right.
And then when you offer a third option,
It violates.
well, again, no, but if you offer an option, and they buy into it, it becomes infectious.
Mm.
And the other option, the only option is the restorative practice.
Right. Right.
Henry, just real quick, do you know the story Monica shared, and I don't have my details at all, so I'm a little, she was talking about some of the work that they were doing in the schools around restorative practices, but she's also was doing some work, was just in the community, and she shared how some of the crimes that were real frequent after school among school-aged children dropped. Do you know that?
So there were some break-ins and burglaries that were going on. And she ended up doing a circle with some gang members, and it dropped off. She and there was a pretty high-profile murder that took place in the city. And the commander of homicide asked her if she would, go talk with the family and do a circle. So we went and met with them. And one family member was extremely angry, and the attitude was, just let us know when he's out, we'll take care of it. So we just had the mom, I think grandmother, sister, cousins, went through restorative questions, and what ended up coming out was some things that had happened. There's often some underlying issues. And after we got into those and they were able to express what was going on, when we got to the question, so what needs to happen in order to make things as right as possible? The individual said, I probably need to move out of the neighborhood too. Within 10 days, I think, they had moved out and they're fine. If we had not had that discussion, it would have been like the Hatfields and the McCoys. It would have just been going on and on and on. We can make a difference in these situations.
And I appreciate that. You don't always stay together. I mean, sometimes like this, at the end of the outcome, be, oh, and now they love each other.
Right.
Well, no, maybe I should just leave and just kind of let this go. And they made that choice on their own.
Right.
Hugely proud.
Right. And it relieved the burden that they were carrying,
Yeah.
The police department, I wasn't involved with this, but recently law enforcement did something I think was pretty restorative. They identified some of the major felons that were on probation in the area. They called them all together. All the police agencies were there. Detroit Police, U.S. Attorney, Prosecutor's Office, the county sheriff, and they said, basically, we know who you are. Right? We know where you live. Now,
And we've got pictures of it.
and they had some community members there, and they talked about what the impact of the crimes had been in their community. But they then said, but you are a part of this community, and we want you to be a part of this community. And they brought services around them. What are the things that you need in order to be right? You can access these services, but understand, if you do what you're not supposed to do, all of us will use the full weight of our offices to address you. And then they went and had a meal. Right? High expectation, high level of support. Okay? It's not doing things to people or for them, but with them. Explaining what the opportunities and the options are, and also what the consequences are. So everybody is clear. We'll see how it plays out over time. Whoops.
Anti-gang, anti-youth violence initiative.
I'm sorry?
The anti-youth violence
Yes.
initiative.
They're doing several things. One, so they would do truancy sweeps, and instead of just taking the kids down to the lockup, what they did, they assembled service agencies. They had parents come in to help them figure out, why is the kid being truanted? Because often there's some underlying issues that are going on there, some issues at home, whatever, and help them to address that. So it wasn't just a punitive measure, but also providing supports that they need to hopefully, turn the kids' behavior around. Third Circuit Court got a call about a year ago from the ACLU and the Defense Bar Association, and they were calling on behalf of the Third Circuit Court, saying, can you come in and give us an overview of restorative practice? I think we might be interested in that. So went in, did the presentation for them. A month ago, they presented a videotape that they made of a mock criminal process using auto theft. The judge, Judge Thomas, who's over auto theft, said, look, I'll take this on so that when people, if their cars are stolen, they can have the option of going through a restorative process. They actually did a mock process, and they're going to use that to present to other attorneys, prosecutors and defense attorneys, to help promote the idea. Black Family Development and Wayne Mediation are going to be working together to provide the facilitators for the process. So I'm real excited about this. This has been something that was unanticipated, but it's going on. I should also say that I actually got a chance to, I went into a prison and was doing some discussions about restorative practices with a group of guys there. Passed out the cards and everything, and when I went back the next week, I said, you know, how are things going? You know, did you use what I shared with you? And one guy said, yeah. He said, let me tell you what happened. I said, oh, what happened? He said, one of the inmates stole something from another inmate. And one of the guards said, you know, it had to be this particular guy. He said, because nobody else was there. And the guy was like, no, man, why are you blaming me? What, you know, all blaming. So the guy that had explained the process to, he says, look, why don't we sit down and talk about it? So he got the guard, the guy who was robbed, and the guy who was accused of robbing him to sit down and go through the process. And he said, when they got to the question of, what have you thought about since? Because the young man explained how he felt about having this stuff. The kid who took it, the guy who took it said, you know what? This is all I've ever known to do. So he told the guy, he said, look, I need you to know that I'm serious. I'm really sorry about this. So what can I do for you? And the guy was like, you know, I'm good. It's fine. You gave me stuff back up there. He said, no, I need you to know that I'm serious. So he said, I'm good. He said, well, how about this? I know you work every day. He said, so for the next 3 days, I'll do your job. You get your pay. And turns out that the guy who said this was responsible for a very major incident that happened in the city of Detroit. So what I'm hoping to be able to do is to reconnect him with the individual that he hurt. Because if he's got that mindset, then what do you do with him when he comes back, and the healing that can go on. Juvenile Assessment Center. The Juvenile Assessment Center handles all the kids that go through the juvenile justice process. All of their staff are being trained, so they will be addressing kids in a more restorative way. Other thing, youth development agencies. There are a lot of agencies that have been trained. They're actually, Black Family Development, between the work that I've done, and there are about 1,100 people that have been trained across several different agencies, including schools in Detroit. So Big Brothers Big Sisters, they've infused it into all of their work. In fact, they just received a federal grant to expand the work that they're doing, and all their staff are being trained in restorative practices as trained. Black Family Development, I mentioned, they're doing their neighborhood work, they're doing their internal work with families and social services. Central Care Management is an organization similar to Black Family Development. The county gives that work to nonprofit organizations in working with juvenile justice, and the city is broken up into sectors. Central Care Management, I trained all of their staff. They handle another area. City Year, which is working in schools, they have a program called ABCs, attendance, behavior, and citizenship? No, what's the C? Attendance, behavior, I forgot the C. But they didn't have anything for the B, behavior. So we have trained all of their staff in restorative practices, and they found it very helpful in addressing their work. In fact, there's been some discussion. Are we doing anything nationally with them now?
Not sure.
Not sure. Okay. We're working on it. Goodwill Industries Flip the Script. This is a program that works with men who have been released from prison, and the leadership of that program has been trained in restorative practices, and they're beginning to use that and infuse it with their work. The Man Network and Brothers on Patrol, these are neighborhood guys who patrol around schools before and after school hours. Their staff have been trained in, and I talked to Bishop Anthony Russell, who is over the Man Network, and he told me some of his volunteers have been trained, some have not. And he said, I can always tell the ones that have been through the training because they manage they view and manage the issues that they have to deal with differently. Urban Neighborhood Initiative is in Southwest Detroit. Children's Society is working in schools, doing a lot of different work. Neighborhood Services Organization is Frank McGee, who works primarily with young men, both those that are disconnected and those that are in school. And he's very adept at helping guys to process through their issues. So again, he took to this process like a duck to water. It's been phenomenal for him. And then the Skillman Organization, our staff, Steve came and did a training for us, and we fancy ourselves a learning institution. And all of our meetings start with a kind of a check-in and often a check-out. And we've gone through a major strategic planning process, and you know, when you put two people in the room, sometimes there's conflict. We've had staff, and we've been able to coach them through, and they've been using the restorative question cards, and it's really made a difference, even in our own organization. Just a couple of quotes for some kids. What change have you seen since the adults started using restorative practice? I do my work without being disruptive or disrespectful. That's a good outcome. Has using a restorative approach helped you increase your ability to solve problems with your peers? Restorative approach helps you solve your problems the right way without having a fight, and it helps you get along with your parents without cussing them out or running away. I've observed calmness, fairness, and people not afraid to admit when they are wrong, and a willingness to accept responsibility for their actions, and I take more responsibility for my actions. That's my 18-month-old grandbaby. So it's time for your questions. I think we ran a little bit over. Questions?
I must use that slide. Well, I've changed it.
Questions? Yes.
Yes, we have problems with gangs in
Yeah.
Detroit, and I was wondering if there's some program that's specifically working restoratively with gang members.
So, Monica has done a lot of work, with them, and with this new model that they're using with the community service officers, I'm sure that's going to be a part of the work that they do as well.
Okay, but there's no specific,
We had a gang squad. Oh, I'll take that back. There are now youth workers that have been hired. They're in the process of being trained, and I'm sure they will be engaging with them.
Because like in
as well.
Chicago, they have.
Right. Yeah, we have a ceasefire initiative that's going on as well. Yes. Other questions? Somebody tell me, what time was that supposed to be done?
Roughly about now.
Okay. I'll take a few more questions. You had a question?
Yeah, I'm interested in the legislative side of it. If there's legislation in relation to restorative justice in your area.
Yeah, so we have the state, and in fact, I didn't mention this, the Civil Rights Division of the state has been charged with helping the state legislature has encouraged districts to move away from zero tolerance. And the Civil Rights Department has taken a responsibility of trying to help districts with that. And one of the smorgasbord of things that they're recommending that school districts do is to adopt a restorative frame. The other thing, I used to work for Prison Fellowship Ministries, and around 2000, we were still in the stupid period where all we wanted to do was get tough on crime. 3 strikes, you're out. But that never worked because you can't build enough jails to do that. Now, because of the economics, the one upside of the down economics is that people are looking for ways to save money, and they're open to almost anything now. And so restorative practices is becoming more acceptable than it had been in the past. But there is legislation in different places.
Right. Second question is, what type of, how do you mentioned the Detroit Police Service, of course.
Yes.
how do you work with that organization? Because I can imagine there will be some pushback from police officers who are accustomed to deal with crime and punishment. I hear punishing people more so than restoring. How do you guys weave through that type of response or type of?
So, one, I think it's relationship. Two things. I don't care what group you go into. You're going to find, it's just like with the schools. You got the 3 groups. You got some folks, they're already being restorative. They're doing it. You got the other group that's from Missouri. They're willing to listen. You got to show them. And then, as Ted Wachtell calls them, you got the curmudgeons. We don't do it that way. Our folks won't respond to that. You got to. The reality is, you got to find those first 2 groups. Find an advocate that can begin sharing it. The other thing, I think a top at grassroots and grass top model works best. Getting folks in the community, because the police still work for us. My challenge was to raise the knowledge and understanding of restorative practices so that the community would begin demanding it. What's happening now in the community, among leadership and also in the community, you're starting to hear them use the language, which is important.
Yeah.
I make it a habit every day to talk to somebody about restorative practice. You sitting getting your tires changed. You know, if somebody broke in your house, would you rather, traditional system, was the law broken, who broke it, how much time we're going to give them? Restorative system, who was harmed, who caused the harm, and what do we need to do to make things as right as possible? Which one of those do you think you'd like to do? Start talking about it. Talk it up. Yep.
Henry, just want to make a comment that what's particular about what's happening is who this guy is and what he brings to the equation. And when I see that he was actually a personal assistant to the mayor, I mean, he's got such a big picture, and he's got the capacity himself, but he's also got the passion. It's hard to imagine it happening without your stewardship. And I guess the point I want to make is the fact that he alluded to leadership. And to me, there are 3 things that make it happen. 1 is leadership, 2 is leadership, 3 is leadership. End of session. Well done, mate.